Yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Good. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Leshley, our office has received examples of accreditors cracking down on the sincerely held religious beliefs of higher education institutions who are going through the accreditation process. As you, I'm sure, know, the president of SACS, the accreditor for schools like UNC in North Carolina, announced a desire to investigate that school for its decision to create the School of Civic Life and Leadership, which had been unanimously supported by their Board of Trustees for its emphasis on free expression. And just last year, the ABA adopted a new standard for accreditation that requires law schools to provide curriculum on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism education. They also adopted a non-discriminatory policy that includes gender identity and sexual orientation. And then the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, which accredits medical schools, as you know, has DEI requirements in place. And faculty and institutions, if they're in danger of their programs failing to meet accreditation requirements if they object to these, do you think it's proper for an accreditor to threaten institutions seeking to operate according to their sincerely held religious beliefs by forcing political litmus tests on them through DEI requirements, gender identity, non-discrimination requirements, things like that?
Accreditors should not run colleges. They should regulate the outcomes of colleges fairly and precisely. I talked about that in my testimony. Accreditors, and I think all regulators at the state and federal level, should be very precise and very determined to make sure that institutions produce the outcomes that matter most. And then after that, they should leave colleges alone to specialize, to evolve, and very importantly, to serve with enormous variety and almost infinite interest among student populations in colleges with varying interests, priorities, and designs. And since we believe in that, we would also not micro-regulate the issues that you describe. We would not require a college to have a DEI policy, nor would we object if they had one. It's their business.
So within the boundaries of the law, of course, a college should be somewhat free to be the kind of college that it wants to be, that attracts students and parents, helping their students to make decisions, focuses perhaps on academic excellence and academic outcomes. The accrediting institutions should focus on those. Yes. Changing gears for a moment, moving towards the cost of higher education, and this will be towards Dr. Gillen, rather. Dr. Gillen, a 2022 GAO study found that the direct loan program has cost taxpayers approximately $200 billion since its inception, largely due to the generous forgiveness and repayment options for borrowers in the IDR plans. 80% of parents report that four-year schools cost too much, and 50% say four-year schools are inaccessible to middle-class Americans. Wall Street Journal survey this year found that 56% of graduates believe college was not worth the cost due to the lack of job skills obtained and the high debt in return. But yet the Biden administration, of course, is doubling down on their student loan transfer scheme. Congress voted to end that. The Supreme Court declared it, of course, unconstitutional, and yet he's trying to do it through other mechanisms, as we know. This despite the fact that a 2017 study showed that by economists at the New York Federal Reserve found that colleges raised tuition costs by 60 cents for every dollar in increased federal loan subsidies. So to you, Dr. Gillen, does loan forgiveness have been demonstrated to decrease costs, or would it decrease costs? What have you found or seen?
No, I think I would do the opposite, actually. So if you have the anticipation or the actuality of widespread loan forgiveness, that's going to do a couple things. On the student side, students are going to borrow as much as possible. So right now, most students actually don't borrow because most students are going part-time, and so the majority of students don't borrow. That's going to change. So if nobody has to repay loans, everybody's going to borrow, and they're going to borrow as much as they can. At the same time, the school is going to look at the students with all this cash, and they're going to say, well, we could use some of that, and so they're going to raise prices, and they're going to cut their other aid. So the loan forgiveness is basically going to exacerbate the student loan debt problem in the sense that we'd have even higher debt until right after it was forgiven, because it would so skew the incentives of both the students and the schools.
I think you're exactly right, and the president's plan, thankfully overridden by the Supreme Court, despite his efforts to try to find other avenues there. 60% of the people in my district don't have college degrees. his student loan transfer scheme to them to have to pay for it would apply to families making up to $250,000 a year, which is far beyond the average income within folks in my district and most districts throughout the country, I'm sure. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chairman.